Welcome to Facts on the Ground, everybody. I'm Jesse Zerwell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Misty Winston. And we are streaming live on Rockfin and YouTube. And joining us today from Northern Ireland is Rick Munn. If you tuned into or if you've watched our panel discussion from last week or earlier this week, you might recognize Rick. He was a part of that panel. And for the past 9 months or so, or you could say over the past year, Rick's been broadcasting from Northern Ireland on both Twitter and his Telegram channel about what's happening there and in the UK more broadly. So we're going to be speaking with Rick today about the so-called pandemic and the insanity that it's been breeding in just about every corner of the world at this point. So Rick, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So as I just mentioned, you are in Northern Ireland, in or very close to Belfast, and Northern Ireland very recently, as you broadcasted in one of your videos, basically instituted full-on medical apartheid. And we see this expanding or increasing throughout the UK and Europe. So can you talk a bit about that, the hammer that's come down lately, and what that's looked like both where you are locally and what your sense of it is more broadly throughout the rest of the UK and Europe?
Yeah, well, within Northern Ireland here, the island of Ireland, there's a border between the north and the south. And in Southern Ireland, for many months now, there has been the so-called vaccine passports or green passes or whatever label you want to put on them that have prevented people that don't have vaccinations from entering a bar, a restaurant, a cinema, a sports club, or whatever it happens to be, to partake of the facilities that are there. They're allowed to sit outside and eat like second-class citizens, a little bit like things are maybe in New York. I believe there's the same kind of regime in New York. This has been in the south for very many months now. We have escaped it in the north, even though, the border's non-existent. You can walk from north to south, but literally by crossing the border, you're into a freer society in the north than you would have been in the south. So that has been the case for quite some time. Last week, and this had been telegraphed for a while. Of course, they're bringing in about case numbers are going up, and this is all with the their end goal from this is to get people injected. Okay, that's the end goal. It's got nothing to do with health. It's got nothing to do with prevention of a spread of a virus. It makes no sense whatsoever. But they're bringing it in from the 29th, which is tomorrow, Monday, the 29th of November. Our so-called executive had said that all licensed premises and unlicensed premises from tomorrow would need to require evidence of double vaccination before you could be allowed entry. They claim that there would be a 13 or a 14-day grace period up until the 13th of December before businesses are fined for breach of this. So again, they're putting the emphasis on a business to police this because there's no way that they can do it themselves. So if I break the rules, if you want to call them that, the business suffers for it. So obviously that puts a pressure on the business. There's since been backpedaling, shenanigans, skullduggery from the executive to say, well, actually, we're not going to implement this at the beginning for cafes and restaurants. It will just be licensed premises. So they're throwing ideas out. They're changing. They're turning on a dime. The end result is to cause just aggravation. People are now at the point where they're just hacked off. They've been messed around for 2 years now. And even the people that were buying into the whole vaccine sales pitch or the snake oil pitch about the vaccines will set you free, they can see they're in a worse position or potentially worse position this year than they were this time last year. The alleged cases are up. More people are dying. They've less freedom than they would have had this time last year. So it's all heading down this road. some places started earlier than others, but I believe ultimately the end goal is to roll this out everywhere, to cause vaccine or to coerce people to take these vaccines. So this has now reached my door. In the past, it was okay. It's in the south, it's in Wales, it's in Scotland, it's in Australia, it's in New York. But I've been saying now for a while, what you're seeing in other places, this is the end result for everywhere. That's what they want to try and implement everywhere. Some places are more resistant than others. Some places are fighting it more than others, but that's their goal, is to roll this out everywhere. So now it comes to my shore now.
Yeah. And it seems like all of this stuff is incredibly arbitrary because these injections don't prevent people from getting infected. They don't prevent transmission of COVID. So it's all of this stuff is very arbitrary. And one of my favorite things is when they will say that, a bar has to close at 10 p.m. or whatever, because, everybody knows COVID's a big party animal and it only goes out after 10 p.m. It's all of these ridiculous and arbitrary measures that don't make any sense. And it's very clear that this is, you said it's not about health. It's never been about health. This is always been about a power grab.
It is, and more than that, Misty, there's something else that the more you think about this, okay, these literally insane diktats that they're bringing out. For example, in Northern Ireland, if you go to a cafe to have a coffee, people are expected to mask when they walk through the door, to mask while they're ordering a coffee. Then they will go and sit at a table and unmask. If they need to go to the toilet or the bathroom in between their sips of coffee, they have to mask. Then when they're leaving, they have to mask again. And there's a place I frequent, and literally from the front door to the serving area is about 10 feet. Okay, 10 feet. People are masking for 10 feet, then sitting down, and then masking for 10 feet to walk out. Now, to me, that's insane. And one of the reasons I think they do that is the people like us that can see through the insanity, it aggravates us. It gets my blood boiling, okay? So they're like, well, we can't mask you guys. You guys aren't buying into the BS science. So what we'll do is we'll aggravate you. We'll make sure that if you're sitting somewhere non-complying, you're going to see people parading past you that gets your blood pressure up. And I think there's a lot of gaslighting and a lot of really passive aggressive stuff going on with these policies, just simply to aggravate and to wind up those that can see the truth. There's no two ways about that.
Yes.
That's an interesting perspective on the masks. I haven't thought about it from that angle. I've mostly looked at it as being a sort of ritual that people partake in this concept, although I think it's a very real concept that Dr. Matthias Desmet from Belgium has talked about, called mass formation. Mass, M-A-S-S, not mask. But part of that theory or that concept involves the ritualization of certain practices to show that you are indeed part of the mass. And I think the masks, I've looked at masks, at least from one angle, as part of that, as part of not just buying into the official narrative or the pseudoscience behind it, but as a way of identifying yourself socially as belonging to a group. It's a sign of conformity, among other things.
One of my favorite mask stories was an NFL team just spent 3 hours on a field playing a full contact sport. This is American football, full contact sport, in each other's faces, spit flying everywhere, sweat flying everywhere. And that was fine. But then they were in the locker room celebrating without masks and they got a fine. And that's, I mean, that's silly.
If you watch UFC, Ultimate or boxing, UFC, for example, it's a cage fight. Two guys are locked in a cage. They're pretty much naked, okay? They're sweating. They're rubbing up and down against each other. They're grappling, trying to choke each other, punching each other in the face. There's blood, not spit, blood flying everywhere. But before they fight, they mask. And when they're doing the post-fight interviews, they mask for health reasons. After they've just literally rubbed against each other, chest to chest, for 25 minutes. Jesse, you said at the beginning that insanity is being bred. Okay, they're breeding insanity. Listen, the world has always been a nut house. There's always been crazy people in the world. This is nothing new, but it's breeding. It's literally multiple. So the insanity that was always there is constantly being taken to the next level, and that's a very important point. And on the mask side of things, if I can say this, whenever I started trying to do these clips that I do, I tried to focus on mental health. Okay, that was my initial reason for doing my Twitter channel. People I saw were deteriorating mentally. They were cracking, they were falling apart. So I tried to give them some mental health tips. And one of the things that I said was, look, habit formation is very important. To form good habits is important. To form bad habits is a very negative thing. And if you do something regularly and periodically for like 30 to 60 days, it becomes habitual. Okay. So these people now that you're seeing who are ritualizing or doing what they do with the masks as a ritual to belong to a group are also now, they've been doing it habitually for 2 years. That's a habit that they've now got into that they will find very, very hard to break. And even they go above and beyond. In the UK, we've never been told to mask outdoors. That has never even been pushed on us by the government. But today, before I did this show, I went for a walk into town. I came back again. There were legions of people walking around outdoors alone with masks on. So not only have they become, indoctrinated into this cult and, programmed to do this ritual, but they're actually taking it further than their masters have requested. Almost like, look what I'm doing. It's like, if you tell
virtue
your kids
signaling.
Virtue signaling. Oh, it's breeding insanity. It's breeding.
Yeah. And what's also insane about the masks is that they've become commodified. They've become a fashion item, if you will.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
and even down to even down to the level of AOC.
Medicare for all masks.
Yeah, and I saw her wearing one in a photo once that had, it looked like gold chains used to hold it on her ears, and it looked like something that Prada or Gucci had made.
Yeah.
And I was just immediately struck by how
ridiculous,
silly it is, but also there's something sinister about it. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's.
You've seen The Handmaid's Tale, yeah?
Yeah.
Right. Well, strangely enough, that was like a dystopian hell. But even those girls didn't have to wear the mask over the nose. Notice that? So what they're bringing in here has echoes of that dystopian, futuristic, hellish environment that's portrayed. I haven't actually watched it, but I've seen clips and I've seen photographs. And, that's one of the things. They put a hat on, a bonnet on with like blinkers that you can't see to the left or right. And your mouth is covered that stifles your speech. But even there's no one walking around in a Handmaid's Tale going, you need to pull your mask up over your nose or else you'll be in trouble. But we're getting that in our world. That's, a lot of it's predictive programming too, and it was, covering your mouth and your face. You can't communicate, you can't smile. Like my dad, let me give you a story. My dad at the moment is in hospital, right? He's okay. He's been in for 4 weeks. He's being treated with antibiotics for an ear infection. He's diabetic. He can hardly hear in one ear, and he's got an ear infection in the other ear, okay? He was told by the nurses, you don't need to wear a mask as a patient when you're in the hospital. But he still kept putting it on because he was just ritualized and had become used to it. And even when he couldn't hear what the nurses were saying, because they had masks on, and he was, instead of saying, I can't make out what you're saying, would you mind just showing me your mouth? He persisted, half deaf, to try and lip read someone with a mask on just because he didn't want to upset the protocol. That's how far gone it is. It's like I said, it gets, the more I dwell on it gets my blood pressure up.
One of the things that it freaks me out the most is how the impact that this is having on children, because kids, especially, toddler age, like maybe kindergarten age, they very much depend upon seeing facial expressions as a way of socializing themselves, as a way of figuring things out, as a way of, you know what I mean? And so this whole thing where we're expecting 5 and 6 year olds to wear masks 8 hours a day in school, school is completely ridiculous. And it's fine for rich people to have dinner parties, like Nancy Pelosi can have a dinner party, and nobody but the servants are wearing masks. But we want our kids to wear masks 8 hours a day. That's what I mean by like the arbitrariness of it. It's all very, there is no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, I went to an Ohio State college football game this year, and they were like, you don't have to wear a mask when you're like in the stadium, like in the seats. But if you go inside to go to the concession stand, you have to put your mask on. And that's ridiculous. Like, you're inside a stadium with 105,000 people screaming your face off. And that's okay. But you can't like go get a hot dog without putting your mask on. It's just all of this stuff is very arbitrary. None of it makes sense. And it's all very selectively applied. Like I said, the rich people don't have to abide by these rules. They're able to have their dinner parties and go to their, Met Gala balls and all of this stuff. And they don't have to wear masks, but we want our kids to wear masks every day in school. It's
that's another part of what's being done in terms of, the message that's being sent out there is very much that, they're trying to bring in a two-tier society. That's obvious to anyone with eyes that can see. That's obvious. And what they're doing is now they're trolling us big time. For example, they're saying, okay, politicians are exempt from vaccination, so we don't have to get them done, even though many of them have posed for set up vaccine shots. They're still saying, okay, you guys need to get them, we don't. Pfizer employees, it's not mandated, but it's mandated for everyone that they've produced the product for. When you look at earlier this year in the UK, the Queen's husband died. Finally, he kicked the bucket, okay? He was in his 90s, he died. The Queen was famously pictured in Westminster Abbey as this disheveled old lady in a pew on her own with her little black hat and her little black mask on. And people were saying, look at the Queen. She's leading by example. Three months later at the G7 summit with her son, Prince Charles, and all the world leaders, she was sipping gin and tonics. She was having a laugh. There was no issue whatsoever. It's trolling on the highest level. And I think, to be honest with you, I've got a little bit of a narcissistic personality myself. I like to wind people up. I like to aggravate people in real life too. It gives me a thrill. So I can see these politicians. I know how their minds are working. I think that's good. If I was a politician, that's exactly how I would be aggravating people as well. So they're really pushing it. This two-tier society thing, what applies to us does not apply to you. Look at sporting events. Look at any of these big gala dinners that are being held. The politicians are waltzing around, free breathing. All the plebs, the servants, the people that work in the establishments, people like me, have to stand there with their hands by their side and their mask on and nodding their head like little compliant dogs. But unfortunately, this is the breeding of insanity again. Insanity.
And we saw it very much so on an international level at COP26 with the officials masking and unmasking at random points in time for.
My favorite is when they get caught, like just before they go on camera, they don't have a mask on. And as they're getting ready to go on camera, they put their mask on. And it's or like for the photo ops, they caught, I think it was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, a bunch of people. They didn't think any cameras were running or anything. They were all standing around talking with no masks on. And as soon as they got ready for the photo op, everybody put their mask on. And I don't know how more apparent they could be making it at this point.
But that's what I mean. I think they're trolling. They know that guys like us will pick up on that. They know that guys like us will discuss it. They know that guys like us will become aggravated and frustrated by it and take up a lot of time discussing it like we're doing now. And in reality, they're just sitting, rubbing their hands together going, yep, we're trolling good here. And COP26 was climate change. They made a point that they were flying in private jets, the fleets of private jets, fleets of armored cars. And then they're pontificating about climate change. It is trolling and nothing but trolling. The plebs that are not awake, they think, okay, they're trying to make it a better world. People like us are seeing this and becoming really grieved at the moment. People are getting angry. It's not a good situation.
Yeah. And what struck me recently about not just the masks, but the mandates from all angles that seem to be all over the place is that that's part of the plan is for it to be helter skelter, I think, to see what people will bow to and what they won't. And unfortunately, we're seeing that a lot of people are willing to bow to just about anything that's proposed to them, or I shouldn't say proposed. It's essentially forced or coerced, whether tacitly or implicitly, or I should say explicitly or implicitly. And it makes me think, as I'm sure all our minds have gone here, that, you know, there's a person, or there are people who are behind this, manipulating this. And to a lot of
Yep.
people, that sounds like it's in the realm of conspiracy theory, but it's true. There are people behind this who are manipulating this, who are very strategic about the messages they're putting out and how they're playing upon people's fears and uncertainties. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the masking thing, right? It's like, you know, the Milgram experiment with the electric shocks that was carried out to see, you know, people will do what someone in a uniform or in a position of authority tells them. Now, that was taken to the nth degree. They faked that people were to.
Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry, my screen cut out there.
Yeah,
So,
you froze a little bit. You're
you know,
fine. We can still hear you.
that's at one end of the spectrum. This, in a way, is a Milgram experiment. To You can still hear me, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm not sure. Oh, that's good. Sorry. I'm not sure. The connection's intermittent here, so apologies for that. So what I'm saying is, this is a low-level Milgram experiment that's working very, very well indeed. So they're bringing out, okay, will people wear masks just because we tell them to? There's no scientific evidence to back it up whatsoever. We know that the so-called virus particles are thousands of times smaller than the holes in the masks. We know that people don't follow masking protocol effectively, and we've now had almost 2 years of it, and it's had no effect whatsoever on the so-called spread of a virus. But yet, people still do it because someone in a suit and tie who claims to be a professor or a doctor or a politician says to do it. So they'll nod and they'll say, okay, we must comply. And back to what you said also, Jesse, that, you know, this fitting in with the crowd, okay, it's key also. If you go into, no one wants to really, some people are very extroverted. Some people dye their hair pink. Some people, you know, wear outrageous clothes because they want to be seen and they want to be noticed, which is cool. That's beautiful. But most people just want to be the gray guy in the crowd. They don't want to attract trouble. They don't want to attract attention. So if you're in an area where there's 500 people and you're the only one unmasked, that puts a huge amount of pressure on you that you must conform, even though you don't agree with it, you don't believe in it, and you don't want to participate in it. That psychological pressure on you is immense. And I think there's a lot of people out there that know this is rubbish, that don't want to participate in it, but because of just the way a lot of people are, that they don't want trouble, they don't want the security guard to approach them, they don't want to be approached by a group of people with a finger pointed at them, they just go along with things. And again, the government knows that. That's also part of the plan. If we can get enough people to do it, we'll pull in all the people who are sort of not sure about this, but they'll go along with it just for a quiet life. So yeah, this is, to me, it's like a Milgram experiment. And then of course they introduce it to their children in school. People said they won't come near my children with a vaccine, they won't come near my children with a mask. But again, because the majority of parents may be going along with it, and the majority of people may be going along, they do it for a quiet life. And that's not a criticism, by the way, because not everybody is in your face. It's not a criticism at all. You know, I'm reading a lot of comments now where people are saying, okay, if you go along and get a vaccine, you're dumb. Or if you wear a mask, you're just a sheep. It's not like that. You know, it's not like that at all. People don't appreciate the peer pressure and the societal pressure that is being put onto people to do things that they don't want to do. And if you're fortunate enough that you can live completely independently and everything people say and think about you goes right over your head, you're in a very small minority. A lot of people are doing things to put food on the table or because they don't want, maybe, you know, let's say you grew up being bullied or whatever, or you came from an abusive background. You don't want strangers coming up to you aggressively in public places, pointing the finger at you because you're different. You know, people will just go along with things for a quiet life. And again, that's part of the sinister, evil agenda. That one of the things that really grinds my gears is that the government is preying on that for people that really are too reserved to make a stand, and they're forcing these issues and diktats on those people. And I believe that's what the coercion side of things really gets me. I don't care if people get vaccinated. I don't care if people walk around in a mask, but not under duress and not under coercion. That's when it becomes out of order.
Yes. And Jesse, to
Absolutely.
your point, I love when people claim that it's like conspiratorial, that there's this group of people who are making decisions for everybody. That's not conspiratorial. What do you think the board meeting of any like Fortune 500 company is? That's what they're doing. Do you think that they sit around in a room and like make decisions? Yes, absolutely they do. That's exactly what they do. That's not conspiratorial. That's how things work. There's a group of extremely wealthy, extremely powerful people who have an agenda and are using their power and control and money to push that agenda. That's not conspiratorial. That's just the way things work.
Yeah, absolutely. And one can go online and find not just documentation of all of this, but the people themselves in front of cameras making the statements.
Yeah.
People like Augustin Carstens of the Bank of International Settlements,
Klaus
in
Schwab,
Switzerland, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, Mark Carney. There's a huge list of people. And I think what's important to state about that is that no, they're not all sitting in a room together conspiring, at least all the time. They have their own individual interests, but they've taken this pseudo pandemic as an opportunity to not just pursue their individual interests, but their interests that align as well. And that is the vaccines. The vaccines are a step toward them realizing their interests. We are not just experiments to see if this kill shot works, which it clearly doesn't, but we're chess pieces that they're using to realize whatever end games they have, both individually and collectively. And again, one doesn't have to go far to find that evidence, but it's important to remember that what we are able to see and read is what they want us to be able to see and read. So one should operate under the assumption that just because the World Economic Forum website is spelling out the Great Reset in plain English, that doesn't mean that that's all there is to the agenda. There's certainly, I would say, much more going on behind closed doors, if you will.
These guys are all, listen, they're all killers in more ways than one. Okay, you don't get to be in the position of the president of America or the head of Pfizer or the head of government without being ruthless, without being prepared to stab people in the back, without being completely self-centered and egocentric. Okay, so all these guys share a lot of qualities, for want of a better expression, qualities that got them to the position that they're in. And whilst I agree, they all do have a collective agenda. At the moment, it benefits each one of them. So when this crisis was unleashed upon the world, the amount of money that was made by politicians on the back of PPE equipment, setting up 37 billion they spent in the UK on a test and trace app that's now being dismantled. Who got the money? Who profited from that? 37 billion pounds was spent on an app that's now defunct. They built Nightingale hospitals that were never used. There wasn't a single patient went into any one of the so-called overflow hospitals. Who paid the contractors? What contractors got money to do that? Who got the money to take them all down? They were profiting all along the way. And unfortunately, there's a saying that there's no honor among thieves. Okay, they're all thieves and they're all robbers and they're all bandits. And for now, they're all profiting. But sooner or later, someone will rise up more than others and demand a bigger piece of the pie. And that's when the knives get out among them. And they realize, okay, we're going to have to intensify our efforts here just to stay afloat, stay relevant. And yeah, it's going to get messy. I think it's going to get messy in so many ways, not even just for the people on the ground like us, but even among government. You'll probably start to see a lot of sudden deaths and disappearances and freak accidents among the Illuminati over the next year or so as well as they outlive their usefulness.
Well, yeah, because it's like high school with psychopaths. So, I mean, they're all like, if they're all going to the same school, so they're all cheering for the same team, but there's cliques. And there's cliques among, you know what I mean? So, and you know, you got the jocks and you got the nerds and you got the, so that, I mean, and they're all working towards basically the same agenda. But they do have their own personal vendettas and their own, I mean, and so it freaks me out because, and you're right though, it is going to get to the point where we're going to start seeing it impact them in their circles too. Probably already is, frankly. We're probably just not seeing as much of it because they're very good at hiding it to control information. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that it's probably already impacting them in their personal circles. But yeah, this is it's really it frustrates me that people find that to be conspiratorial. This is not. It's very apparent. It's very obvious what's happening here. I mean, they couldn't be making it more clear. You know, we're seeing it with the masks being selectively applied and the vaccine mandates being selectively applied, and the way that they're using this as forget the power grab. This is a financial grab too. They're using this as a way to shovel money to the top 1%. We've seen that in the United States, specifically with the CARES Act. So, and this is just like a continuation of that. And again, that also lends into the power grab because money is power. But from all fronts, we're getting screwed. And they never let a good crisis go to waste. They never let a good crisis go to waste. They did the same thing with 9/11, with the Patriot Act. They're taking away our civil liberties again. They're shoveling money to the top 1%. This is being used against the people, and the people are actively going along with it and cheering it on. And again, that's not a criticism, because I understand, like Rick was talking about, it's very difficult to go against the grain. It's very hard. You will get slandered and smeared and bullied and attacked, and you'll be called a conspiracy theorist, and you'll be called all kinds of names. But that's why it's so effective. That's why this emotional manipulation and all of the stuff that it's the propaganda game. They're very, very, very good at this.
Yeah, you have to give them. Yeah, listen, you can say what you want about them, but you have to give them credit and you have to give them their dues. They've done a fantastic job at what they've done to bring us to this point. It's horrible and it's evil, and I don't condone it, but you have to step back and say, you know what? They did a great job of dividing society, introducing this, segregating people, not allowing the people to, you take it like in the past, when in history has, for example, if depending on whether you have a faith or not, it doesn't matter. Every religious denomination or every practicing faith has been shut down in the last 2 years, whether it be Muslim, Christian, Jew, whatever. The synagogues are closed, the mosques are closed, the churches are closed, and there's no kickback. Now, could you imagine 5 years ago if the president had said, okay, we're going to close every mosque in America? Hell's bells, man, it would have been full-on jihad. Or the same with the evangelicals. Do you think they would have sat back and allowed them to be shut down for that time? But not only one group, but every group. And every group has remained silent. And if you take it, I mean, there's a church not far from me here. Last year, there were a few people died that I knew who were very old. And they were buried within 2 days of each other. Now, the church said, okay, we'll only allow 20 people inside. Family members only. You have to sit at 10 feet apart. You have to wear a mask. You can't sing a hymn. It's a 10-minute service. And they complied with that. Outside the church, where I went with other people to pay my respects, there were hundreds and hundreds of us shoulder to shoulder, shaking hands. Haven't seen you for a while. How's life? How's things? I wonder how they're getting on. Then the doors of the church would open and this miserable little contingent of mourners would come out with their faces covered, and the minister standing there with his face covered, surrounded by 300-400 people who didn't give a damn, and they went along with that, so from school level to church level, religious level, faith level, governmental level, everyone has been affected by this. And that's why I'm saying it's a sterling job by the powers that be. They've managed to hit everyone everywhere worldwide. You have to give them due for that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. And it's a grudging credit that I give them, to say the least. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about this new variant, Omicron, that's hit the scene. And I want to talk about it in, not just in general, but also get into the fact that it's apparently come from Africa.
Yeah.
Africa has been doing very well with regard to deaths from COVID-19 and avoiding the kill shots called vaccines.
Yep.
But we've seen, for example, in Tanzania, what happens when officials, heads of state even, don't go along with the global governance program, if you will.
They die.
Right. So we were talking before the show about your experience, work experience in East Africa,
Yep.
in Tanzania, and several other countries. So in the context of this Omicron variant, can you talk about your experience in those countries and what's happened there and what is probably on the horizon for them?
Okay, well, let's look at this Omicron variant, this so-called variant called Omicron. They claim it originates in Botswana. Botswana, I did a little bit of research on this. It's a very, very small country, population circa 2.3 million within South Africa, or the southern part of the African continent. If you check the World Health Organization's dashboard, and you go to Botswana and you see their total deaths from March 2020, they claim it's around 2,300. Do some simple mathematics. 2,300 out of a population of 2.3 million is 1 in 1,000 people have died allegedly in Botswana from COVID. Okay, you could say, well, every death's terrible and tragic. Yes, it is. But it also means that 999 people out of every 1,000 people in Botswana with no medical infrastructure and no vaccines and no masking and no social distancing and no hand sanitization, 999 people in 1,000 survive. Okay. Whenever they released this information or at least the UK government held a press conference yesterday, the day before, hyping up the Omicron variant. It's come from Botswana. It's deadly. The first thing the Botswana officials did, they wrote a letter because they said, listen, this isn't really so bad. Yes, it's infectious, but as viruses mutate, they become more infectious but less deadly. That's just simple science. That's actual science rather than this science, which is peddled by Fauci and co. And they tried this last year when the so-called Delta variant, they originally called it the India variant, but the Indian government actually threatened legal action against the UK to say, you're painting us out to be the originators of some horrific new plague. It's not the case at all. So that's why they renamed it the Delta variant. And that's why you're seeing the Botswana variant will be very quickly called the Omicron variant. Okay, so it's also the official press release said that 4 people had been detected with the Omicron variant, all 4 of which were vaccinated. So it's as bad an attempt to foist the blame onto a sub-Saharan African country as you could possibly have. They need this variant right now. And when I say they need it, there's so many people now dying unexpectedly after short illnesses. I'm sure in America it's published all the time here in the UK and Ireland and within Europe. Sports stars dropping on the pitch, young mothers, young fathers dropping dead. The people are putting 2 and 2 together and finally getting 4 rather than 2 and 2 equals 5 as per the government narrative. They need something to come along that says, okay, this is bypassing the variants. And I guarantee you now, and you can timestamp this one of the major symptoms of this will be cardiac failure. It will be respiratory failure, to tie in along with the fact that the narrative is crumbling with the experimental gene replacement therapy, mRNA drugs, also masquerading as vaccines. So this is why the Omicron has come along right now. They're trying to whip up more fear at this point in time, but they're finding it difficult to do because people are now a year down the line. Last year, they positioned the vaccines as the savior. They said, 3 months to freedom. This is our way out. The roadmap to recovery is irreversible. We'll never go back to lockdown. We'll never go back to masking. We'll never but now they're having to backtrack in this, and it's convenient for them that they're picking a country, let's say, that can't really defend itself very well, which is a small sub-Saharan country like Botswana. So it's like the school bully who decides to pick on the smallest kid, the nerd kid, rather than the jock. He goes for the path of least resistance. So in this case, unfortunately, Botswana, it's you this time. So they're getting the flag for this variant. Within Africa itself, you had Magufuli last year, a vocal, outspoken critic of PCR testing, lateral flow testing, vaccination, and general interference in his country from the powers that be in the United Nations and further afield. Magufuli famously, when this all began, tested a goat, as in an actual goat, a guava fruit, some engine oil, and one of his security team, all four of which tested positive for Corona-19 when running the 45 PCR cycle test. The guy came out with this and he was suggested that he should be reined in by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. 4 weeks later, he's dead. And his replacement, his vice president, was a lady who was a member of the World Economic Forum. She's now in situ within that country. And that will be the catalyst for East Africa to come alongside this narrative, because East Africa traditionally, if you're flying in from anywhere in the world, all the main the main airport you'll fly into is Jomo Kenyatta International in Kenya, or possibly Entebbe Airport in Uganda. That's the inroad to Africa for a lot of Western countries or Far Eastern countries. It's also where a lot of governments have their infrastructure, where American air bases, British air bases are based, because they're covering Somalia, Southern Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, down into Mozambique. It's a very strategic area for the West, is East Africa. And that's now why Kenya is being told, okay, we're bringing in mask mandates in Kenya. The problem with that is people out there don't have government support. People out there are living day by day. So when you bring in a no vaccine, no business, you're literally going to starve a lot of people to death. And, I don't know if you're familiar with the politics and the way things have been going out there for the last 10 to 15 years, but when people in East Africa get hungry and angry, it's bloodshed. It's on a scale of millions. So there's a potential disaster coming down there very soon. When people start to get hungry, I famously heard a broadcast from a news station when I was there once, where there was riots happening in Nairobi in a slum. People were running around with machetes, and they said, listen, it's very simple. A hungry man is an angry man. And when this starts to affect people's ability to eat and support their families, that's when it will spill into violence, unfortunately. And you're going to see that if they try and implement that in East Africa, it will get very bloody very fast.
Yeah. And one has to wonder if that
isn't the goal.
It
helps with depopulation, let's face it.
Right. And, there's another thing that you'll be stoned for as being a conspiracy theorist if you start talking about the Malthusian aspect of everything that's been happening for the past almost 2 years now. But one can't help but wonder if they're trying to play it from both sides to get people in East Africa to go along. And if they don't, well, that's okay. They're going to kill each other off. And that serves our...
And the idea that that's conspiratorial is crazy, because again, they talk about it out loud. They're on video talking about this out loud.
You see, even let's set aside COVID completely. Okay, let's set aside COVID completely. If you go back to 2007, okay, the first time I ever went to Kenya was in 2007, and there was an election coming up. The election was rigged, okay? And the president that got in was from a certain tribe, okay, called the Kikuyus. They were the biggest tribe in Kenya. There's 50 tribes in Kenya. There's a lot of violence along tribal lines. That's just the way it is. That's just life, and has been life there for thousands of years. Okay, if you were to go there today, there is still a refugee camp in a place called the Burnt Forest. And in that refugee camp, there's tens of thousands of people that are still internally displaced people from within Kenya that cannot go back to their own lands because they're told if you come back, you'll be killed. It's as simple as that. That's reality, and that's fact. And it was all done on tribal lines for a power grab. And it didn't matter that these people were being killed. There was thousands of people killed in the post-election violence in 2007 going into 2008. What was done about it? Nothing. You look at the Rwandan genocide that happened. You know, the United Nations commander at the time was flagging up months in advance. There's going to be huge mass killings here imminently if we don't step in and do something. Nothing was done about it. And within the space of 4 to 6 weeks, 800,000 people were butchered within that country. And this didn't happen but 20 years ago. So the thought of mass deaths, mass executions, power grabs, and people being kicked off their homeland or their tribal land, it's happening. It's happening now. It's happened over the last 20 years. This isn't some people, unfortunately, listen, are so insulated. They're so insulated in the West. If they've never been to a place like that, and before I went there, I was completely ignorant and completely insulated, and I still have a lot to learn. Listening to your panel last week with those guys, Nick Hudson and Whitney Webb, and I'm like this. I was just sitting listening, okay, because they know this stuff. They've been studying this stuff for decades. They're experts. I'm just coming into this now, so I'm like, wow, this is what really happens in the world, okay. I had to become exposed to that through the like of your panel to say, fuck, I need to really do my homework and learn more about the mechanics of this. And in the same token, people who think, hardship is not getting McNuggets is, that's an affront to their civil liberties. Fuck, these people they won't survive come what's coming because they're so soft and they're so padded and they're so insulated and they've no concept of what a government is actually capable of doing. They think, oh, Hitler was 1930s Germany, that's gone, that will never happen again. That happened in Europe. That happened in Europe to tens of millions of people, and it didn't happen 500, 600 years ago. This was not even 100 years ago, and now it's all rising up again, and the parallels are there. There's a lot of people would criticize you for saying that there's parallels with the Holocaust, okay? What's happening right now is not the Holocaust, but what's happening right now has echoes and a pattern that is being followed that resulted in something like the Holocaust happening. Okay, so I'm not equating what's happening today in our world with the Holocaust. They're two separate events, but this is different in a different way and could potentially affect a lot more people. But the blueprint from how you get to this point to how you get to the point where people are being rounded up and segregated and being shut out of communities, not being allowed to earn money, being deemed to be plague spreaders and ultimately exterminated because of it, it follows a series of steps. So we're on that set of steps. We're not at the top yet, but we're certainly progressing there. That's plain for anyone to see also.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And one doesn't have to look much farther than Austria, for example, to see where this is going. And it's going to be in Germany soon. There's almost no doubt.
We just talked about this on the Free Assange Vigil, actually, because I'm sorry, my cat's being really annoying. But we just talked about this on the Free Assange Vigil because people get really upset when you make those comparisons. And it's not to compare the circumstances under which these things are happening, but the mechanisms are very similar. And yes, we're not at the end game. We're not at like where it was really bad, but all of these things start somewhere. And we are in the beginning stages of something very similar to that happening. Again, not making a direct comparison, but to deny the similarities is really, really, really bad. That's not a good idea. Yes, it's a different set of circumstances. Yes, it's not, exactly comparable, but it is incredibly similar. And, we are in the very beginning stages of, and we know, like, it's not like we don't have historical precedent. And what really frustrates me about the human species is that we never learn. We never learn from history. And we have an opportunity right now to nip this in the bud and to prevent it from getting to that level. And so many people are just going along with it. And it's really frustrating to watch.
Yeah. And again, that buys into what Jesse said, tying what you've just said, Misty, in with what Jesse said earlier on about this, ritualization, about getting this herd mentality. This cannot work. This cannot work without the mass buy-in of the herd. That's as simple as that. So, for example, if you were a mask wearer and you were an ardent mask wearer and you entered into a premises where no one was wearing a mask, you will probably find those people removing it because they feel the reverse pressure. They're like, well, I'm the only one here without it. I was at a wedding last September, okay? And at the wedding last September, it was in a private venue, and they were very, how can I say, they were very accommodating and open with regards to they weren't enforcing mask mandates. It was a private function with maybe 60 people there, the majority of which don't buy into the COVID BS and didn't buy into the government narrative. There was a contingent of old ladies there, okay, who were terrified, being terrified by the government. They were afraid of not washing their hands, keeping apart from everyone. We respected that. But you see, by the end of the 2 days that we were there, they weren't wearing masks. They weren't washing their hands. They were not social distancing because the majority of people that they were with were not buying into it. So they realized, hang on a minute, maybe there's something more to it than this. And at the beginning, it took maybe 6-7 hours for them to wilt or to melt. But eventually, when we left that place, like everyone was just acting like normal people. So the reverse is also true. If we can get enough people to stand up and say, I'm not wearing that mask, I am not going to get vaccinated, the majority of people are the key to this. And they know that as well, that if they can get mass buy-in, this will work. But if they can't get mass buy-in, this absolutely will fail. There's just not enough people to enforce what they want to enforce.
Right. And going back to real quick, the Holocaust comparison.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem there is that, at least in Western education, we've been conditioned to, so we've heard never again, right?
Yep.
But in Western education, we've been conditioned in our learning to hear or promulgate not never again, but it's not possible that this can ever happen again.
Yeah.
That's the mentality, I think, that is problematic, is that something as horrific as the Holocaust, we've sort of been mentally conditioned to believe that not only should it never happen again, but it's not possible for it to happen again. And that's just, the second part of that is just plain wrong. And
look at Nuremberg. The Nuremberg Code came out post World War II to ensure that there would be no more coercion of people into medical experimentation, etc., etc. It's blatantly being breached right now worldwide.
It has been for a long time in prisons in the United States. They give women hysterectomies against their will. I mean, this happens all the time. Yeah,
with prison inmates and also within the armed forces. The army of any major country is just an army. I mean this respectfully because I know a lot of people who serve in the army. They have told me themselves, we're ordered. You take this injection, you don't question it. If your commanding officer says you're getting an injection, you get it. If not, you could be jailed or court-martialed or whatever. Those guys are the ultimate fertile ground for medical experimentation. Armed forces who are under, rank and file, and also people in prison who have been bribed to say, okay, we'll reduce your sentence by 5 years if you just let us experiment on you. This has been happening, as you say, for decades. But now it's happening it's not happening in, this isn't prisons and this isn't in the armed forces. This is schools. This is happening this is in places of employment. This is within the medical profession itself. They're blatantly breaching the Nuremberg Code with no regard for it whatsoever. And you would have thought, I know there's various, court cases are being brought against this authority and that authority, but the world is just like the breeding of insanity. It's like living in an insane asylum whereby this is being breached. And then people are saying, okay, we're going to take the American government to court on the basis of Nuremberg. It worked with Nuremberg. People are forgetting Nuremberg happened after the Second World War when the Nazis had been deposed from power. That's like trying to take Hitler to court while in 1942, the Jews taking him to court in 1942 to say, we don't like the way you're treating our people and we don't like the fact that we're being shipped off to extermination camps. That doesn't work while the dictators are in power. It only worked after they were deposed. And people they're throwing the Nuremberg thing around while effectively the dictators are still in power. It's clown world.
Yeah, it is. That invocation of international law is certainly vital and should be brought up every chance we get. But your point is well taken that how effective is it when these psychopaths against whom we would like to level the Nuremberg laws are still in power?
Yeah.
The United
And
States has actively said that they will go after any country that attempts to, hold them accountable. I mean, it's a rogue state. We are a rogue state. Like, there is no accountability. There are no rules. The United States is able to do whatever the fuck it wants, anytime it wants to. And that's a real problem.
Yep. You see, the thing is, too, when you remove accountability, when you remove faith in the so-called the system, the legal system or the court system, you've got nothing left. You have nothing. And even the fact that, listen, if I thought there was a deadly disease that I could die from, and there was a vaccine available that had been clinically trialed, and I knew people that were dying, I would be doing it. I've been vaccinated up to here for going to Africa, yellow fever, diphtheria, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, meningococcal meningitis, rabies. I've had them all. Why did I get vaccinated? Because there was a very real chance that if I went there with no hygiene and no access to medical care, if I got yellow fever, if I got rabies, I'm dead. Okay, that was a very real possibility. If you go onto your own government's website and you put in your age, your gender, your height, your weight, it will give you an actual probability of you dying of COVID. I worked out mine being overweight, asthmatic, and pushing 50,000 to 1 chance of death. I'm prepared to take that chance, thank you very much, rather than succumb to medical experimentation. So yeah, they need people to buy into the vaccines. If they don't, then they can't introduce the COVID passes, then they can't introduce the digital IDs, then they can't introduce the social credit, which is the end game here. And like we've discussed this here, we're not at the end game, but we're flying towards it at a rate of knots if this is not checked.
Absolutely. And just a few more things I'd like to get your take on before we wrap up. And I think both of them are events, you could say, or circumstances that we're starting to hear more about in the US, but it seems like in the UK and Europe, there's much more coverage. So the first one being, now it's not just the athletes collapsing on field, but also people in the stands who are collapsing. We saw what happened at the Astroworld Festival at the beginning of this month. So I wanted to get your take on that as somebody who's a bit closer to, for example, the football matches and those athletes collapsing, although it is happening here as well. And then also something that hasn't really been covered as much in the US, to my knowledge, but in the UK, the UK column actually has been doing a really good job of covering this, is basically the culling of people through midazolam and morphine and intubation. People being systematically killed to the tune of thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people. So I'm wondering if we can get your take on both of those, whichever one you want to start with.
Okay, let's go with the culling. Okay, which is what it was. If there's animal, if you're into animal rights, okay, even if you're not into animal rights, if you ever see a seal cull, you know, where they take like a hammer or an axe and they kill a seal, a little baby seal, they smash its head in, blood everywhere. No one in the world would say, I approve of that. No one in the world could approve of that. Okay, so, but yet it's happening that way in nursing homes. It happened in nursing homes in the UK from March 2020. Old people were discharged from hospital without being tested, put into nursing homes to spread a respiratory disease that would kill them. And not only that, but then they were facilitated with midazolam. The amount of midazolam that was used in March and April of 2020 in UK nursing homes was off the scale compared to the previous 2 years combined. Okay. And if you know, midazolam is a respiratory suppressant. So it's like giving an asthmatic that's having an asthma attack, putting a pillow over their face and saying, we're doing this to help you out, you know, or someone that's drowning, you put your foot on their head instead of pulling them out of the water, say, this is to help you. Okay. It doesn't help you at all. the justification was, okay, it's a relaxant. People can't breathe. They're getting frustrated. They're getting worked up. So we're going to give them a little bit of morphine and a little bit of midazolam just to bring them down a little bit, not get them so worked up. It was killing them left, right, and center. There was a systematic cull within nursing homes using midazolam. Same with ventilation. If you put someone on ventilation, it's a very invasive process. You're effectively billowing air in and out of someone's lungs. They can dial that thing up or down as much as they like. And who's going to question a doctor? If you go into an intensive care unit, are you going to start questioning a doctor on what medications are being prescribed? This time last year, no one knew what midazolam was. No one knew what the pathway to, fast track the death was. No one knew about mechanical ventilation and the detrimental effect that it has on the human lungs. But unfortunately, it's took a lot of deaths of vulnerable people in clinical care for people to actually realize what this is. So that is something that's happened and is still ongoing with withholding treatment like ivermectin. Ivermectin is a proven method of treating COVID that has, people say it's a horse dewormer.
Oh.
The person, the guy that invented it won a Nobel Prize. It's it's like if I had the cure for cancer and I knew someone was dying, rather than saying there's a tablet you can take that's very effective and safe, saying no, dose them with radiotherapy. Let's operate, let's cut a tumor out, and let's slap some chemo in there just for good measure. That's what has been done to people that have had COVID-19. Rather than prescribing midazolam, they've been ventilated, they've been dosed up with midazolam and morphine, and they've been euthanized. That's a simple fact. There's no disputing that. But again, the people that have been doing it are still free. Not only are they free, but they're still in their positions. Like Fauci. How is Anthony Fauci not locked up in Rikers Island or frying in a chair somewhere in Florida? Listen, these are things that I just cannot get my head around. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind, and you're going to find more of this down the line when the truth comes out about these so-called vaccines. That in fact, not only did they not prevent you from getting sick and spreading disease, they screwed up your immune system and caused clots that cause blood strokes and ischemic heart attacks and so on and so forth. It's just the poison's coming in from every angle, and it's almost like hell. I hope I don't get sick, because that means I'll have to go to a hospital, and if I go in there, I'm fair game. Okay, I'm fair game. So
Yeah.
it's a scary time to be alive right now.
Well, and you talk about there being no accountability in New York City. Andrew Cuomo, we know he's responsible for how many deaths of senior citizens, of elderly people in nursing homes. And dude, there's no trouble for that. He gets in no trouble for that. He's never going to see the inside of a courtroom for that, ever. I mean, they threw the sexual harassment charges. That was the distraction. And not to say that isn't something that should also be paid attention to. It absolutely should be. But notice that took the place of the fact that he is directly responsible for the murder of, who knows how many older people. I mean,
Matt Hancock was our health secretary during the beginning of this. He was removed for allegedly having an affair with an aide, rather than the fact that he killed tens of thousands of old women. So what did he do this year? He ran the London Marathon as a fundraising event to raise money for the hospice end-of-life care for people with cancer. The trolling, the skullduggery, and the mind games. I mean, come on. Nadine Zahawi, our current vaccines minister, did a clip from Auschwitz 2 weeks ago saying, we can never let this happen again. We can never let ourselves descend from Auschwitz. Come on.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Is...
If you check him on Twitter, go on to Twitter, Nadeem Zahawi, go back like a month. He's broadcasting from Auschwitz saying, this is atrocious. What happened here can never happen again. We can never let ourselves go down this road again. And there he is, hawking the vaccine,
Yeah. And that's unbelievable.
Yeah,
and
check it, see yourself.
Just to give a more specific picture of what's happening with midazolam and this fast tracking pathway to death, this also includes not letting families see their loved ones before they're put to death.
Yep.
It includes a suspension of all kinds of protocols that are normally in place for end of life care. not to mention the fact that most of these people do not need to be on an end of life care pathway.
Correct.
The Daily Expose, the publication, has put out a lot of good journalism and reporting on what's been happening with the culling, and it's very. I think it's imperative that people look into it, because although it's been a bigger story in the UK. It has been happening here in the US, and it probably still is happening. And it really is systemic killing on a huge scale. And I've heard that there are nurses in the UK who've said that, at the beginning of this, they were clapping for us and banging pots and pans. And when they find out what we've done, they're going to stone us to death.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
Which is also to say that the medical professionals are being put in the position of ending people's lives. Not all of them want to do that or are lusting to do that.
Exactly.
They are forced.
Listen, it's like in the Second World War, not every SS guy wanted to go out and shoot people in the heads or round up women and children and put them into concentration camps. But if they didn't do that, then they would have been bulleted in the head or they would have been exterminated themselves. And that's why I'm saying, not every doctor. I mean, my dad's in the hospital at the moment being treated like a king. I can't say enough good about the medical staff that are treating him at the moment. But maybe in a different hospital, under a different set of circumstances, had he been brought in with a stroke, 75 years of age, he might have had a DNR notice above his head. We might not have been allowed in to see him. He could have been put under ventilation and exterminated. So again, it's almost like a lottery when you go into a hospital. What are you going in with? Who's going to be treating you? And what is their current protocol set out by their health trusts? These doctors on the wards are just operating under the directive of a health trust, and they're so far in debt and they have a certain standard of living that they need to meet, and children to support, that if they're told you don't do this, you're sacked or you're put out of a job. Again, it's that fear factor. They're being coerced into doing things that they don't want to do. And like you, I am not saying, by the way, for the record, I don't believe the entire medical profession and everyone in care is out to get us. No, quite the opposite. But there are people doing things that are wrong because they're put under severe pressure by these people that are in charge of the show. And that's my problem. That's where the issue lies.
Yeah. And as pertains to collapsing athletes, we're hearing more discussion of that on this side of the Atlantic now, but it seems to be something that's been more on the radar in the UK and Europe for longer than it has been here. So what's your sense of all of that, the dialogue surrounding it, even because here it's still like, doctors and scientists are baffled, etc.
Well, they're ready coming out. They're ready coming out with things like, for example, the athletes are under severe stress. Okay, there's been, we're all under severe duress with the COVID pandemic. People are under severe mental health pressure. That includes elite athletes. So even though they're running around and they're fit and well, their hearts are under a lot of pressure from, mental anxiety. That could be causing an uptick in deaths. It's easy to disguise when a 75 or 80-year-old dies with a stroke, dies with a heart attack. It's almost to be expected that when you hit 75, 80, you're probably going to drop with something bad or take cancer. It's a different story altogether when it's somebody in their 40s or their 30s or even at school age now. And again, if we can tie it back to what we were talking about with the Omicron variant, they need the Omicron variant right now to try and boost uptake of the vaccines, but as well as that, to come up with a narrative that says this is so deadly, it's bypassing vaccines. And one of the side effects is, for example, ischemic heart attacks, blood clots that cause strokes. And that's why you're seeing people die, not the vaccine, but because of the Omicron variant from Botswana, the deadly Omicron variant.
Right. which
Yeah.
conveniently hit the news on Black Friday. As
Correct.
And right before the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, obviously, too.
Oh, yeah.
My friend Black in the Empire on Twitter, everybody should follow him, Daryl. He's amazing. He just tweeted out recently, "We have now moved to myocarditis isn't that bad, and athletes are dying because they didn't get enough exercise." And that's where we're at. You know, they're now convincing us that it's,
Like
this is totally normal. This is normal.
If I asked you a year ago, can you explain myocarditis? You'd say, what's that? Is that a place in the Far East? You know, what is it? Is it a new Mexican dish, or what is it? You know, it's heart pericarditis, myocarditis, etc. People are now aware of things that they didn't even know existed 12 months ago. And to be honest with you, it's frightening to think, what are we going to know about next year that we don't know about this year? What will be the talking point next year? Will it be a prion disease? Will it be something? The mind boggles, you know. I'm almost,
and just a personal, like, what would we know if WikiLeaks was fully operational?
Oh,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just to wrap, you mentioned earlier that part of the reason you've been putting out the content you do is to provide people with mental health tips or advice. What would you impart to our viewers as we wrap up here, as far as staying sane and keeping on an even keel through all of this?
This is the secret. Okay, you can go to seminars, you can buy books, you can listen to gurus. Let me break it down in about 2 sentences. Okay, disconnect as much as you can from the internet. The more time you spend online, the more your mental health will deteriorate. I don't care who you are, I don't care how strong you are. The more time you spend online, the weaker you become mentally. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is get as much fresh air and exercise as you possibly can. When you're outside of your house, when you're outside of the madness, try and get away from the town, away from the city, and do the things that you love with the people that you love as often as you can. It's something that I preach about a lot. I find it difficult to implement in my own life, but I'm trying it. Disconnect, get out of the house, get some exercise, be with your real life friends more than your online friends. That's my humble advice. Take it or leave it.
I think that's good advice, and I'll take it. And I think that's a good place to wrap. We covered some very, we covered a lot of ground, and I think this is a conversation that hopefully we can continue in the future, because as we've noted throughout all of this, this madness is still being bred, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. So, Rick, I want to thank you very much for joining us today and having this conversation. And as I just said, we'd love to have you back and continue the dialogue. And to everybody who's watching, thank you. We've dropped links to where you can find Rick online on both Twitter and Telegram. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.